So, Walker, to kick us off, let's talk about some targeting and reaching local consumers. I know this is a really huge topic where we could probably talk for days about the different capabilities. So I was wondering if you could share a little bit more on the advanced targeting capabilities that we should be aware of when working through that lens of specifically location-based targeting and reaching local consumers, and like how you think about that.
Yeah, definitely. I think what's super exciting is CTV really is a great spot for this type of execution, right? It's a good medium and there's just new tools. And so starting at kind of the top of the audience-based targeting, right, within connected TV, and we'll talk a little bit more about the guts of how it works in a minute. You can target a single household the way you used to buy TV, where you're now buying more of a larger subset of an area or a zip code or a DMA. You can be super specific and use audiences that matter to you. Obviously, this can go broad, but you can use so many things, whether it's something as simple as age and gender, or people who have visited your website or have signed up for your email, and all kinds of hybrids of them. Lots of interest-based stuff, things that are interested in this or previous purchasers, and then retargeting, right? Users that have seen an ad, hitting them again, finding that right blend of frequency and effectiveness. I think that audience and household approach is super important. But I think what's even more interesting is really when you drill down into the actual location targeting, right? And what those tools look like. There's just a lot more. So when I think about, if you go to the next slide, this is where things get really interesting, right? You can get incredibly precise, obviously, down to the zip code. And that's something that you can get smart about, and like a radial type of approach where it's based on location, but then going a kind of a step deeper, right? People who have visited certain locations, maybe once, maybe a certain number of times, actual real-time proximity. So this is less maybe CTV, but leveraging kind of the combination of let me reach those people within the right radius of my storefront, but then let me reach them again when they're actually closer, maybe on a different device. And again, we'll talk more about how that works. And then another thing, things like competitor conquesting. So people who visited a competitor's location, using all of those different kind of tactics together, independently testing. You don't have to have a minimum for each of these. These are things that can be just applied to any campaign, or again, broken out and testing. There's tons of other types of things you can do, things like time of day and making sure, hey, let's hit them when we're open, or customizing that messaging based on maybe they're a little farther away, and maybe depending on what it is, right? Like delivery versus come to our store. All of that are different ways that you can start to think about targeting differently. And then, of course, combining them, right? And that's where it gets really interesting, which is how do we leverage all of these different tools? And then I think the last piece is the price component, right? You can be very flexible about how much you're willing to pay. So I'll probably pay a little more for somebody who's very close. But again, historically, that's been a challenge where you have to set a cutoff where I don't want to target any customer that's X number of whatever unit of measure you want to use away. But you don't have to. You can just say, yeah, maybe they're actually, I've seen a few loyal customers that come from far away. Are there more like that? You can do something like lookalike modeling, where you can say, hey, how can I find other people that are sharing similar profiles? Or you can open up your geo, but set a very strict price you're willing to pay. So I'll find those users and I'll target them, but I don't want to pay the premium. I want to go for a much less expensive because I know it's maybe a harder sell or what have you. So I think what's really fun here, you can play, right? You have all this data. We'll talk more about measuring and how it works, but when it comes to targeting, the permutations are basically limitless. And it all depends on your brand and what kind of products you sell and what kind of store you operate, or if it's a business that goes on site to people's houses, and how does that impact how you target. That's what's great. And of course, again, this can all be done on the big screen in the living room, as well as across other devices.
Yeah. And it reminds me of the precision targeting and the ability to mix and match, like you mentioned. It reminds me of the fact that marketers in general don't use near 100% of the capabilities that they have at their disposal. Whether it's a MarTech stack or the different marketing tools and stuff, like we just do not penetrate using everything correctly. So that really comes to mind for me is something to deep dive in if you're trying to improve what you're doing, like use those sophisticated capabilities like you were talking about. And I don't know if you'll know, this might be technical, but one question came in around conquesting and how that works, specifically if it's just based off of IP address or if there's a difference between a physical location or a service area.
Yeah, it's actually, there's a lot of different ways that it can be done, right? It's like people who are past purchasers, like the very broad example, it's like, I'm Coke and I want to target people who bought Pepsi, right? There's ways beyond just location based, right? And I might not know the exact level of detail, whether it's like a specific website visit, a specific purchase, but there's a lot of ways and different types of competitive conquesting data available, where again, it's not just necessarily like a physical location based, it's past purchasers of products or interest in XYZ products, search terms, things like that. There's a whole slew of different, and kind of go back to that audience side of it as well. A ton of different ways you can look at that. And when we have some tons of brands that we work with, and like we have TV production company who's targeting people who downloaded a competitor's app, right? So there's like competitive app downloading, conquesting, things like that you can do. But that doesn't have to be for that use case, right? That can be people who have downloaded other types of apps. So lots of ways that can be leveraged as well.